All right, welcome out in video land, and thank you for those in attendance. A lot easier to talk to a room full of students rather than to a bunch of empty chairs. I appreciate that. All right, kind of along the same lines as the minimum wage thing, and in one of my chapters in one of my courses, they're together because there's a lot of similarities, is a discussion of rent control as a way to help low-income tenants versus housing vouchers, which just means a discount coupon from the government to defray some of your housing expense. All right, so let's take a quick look at that through our economic model, our standard supply and demand model. Q for the quantity of housing available, and dollars per occupancy of the housing unit per month and apartments. Okay, and now demand is what? The tenants or potential tenants. Okay, and then supply would be your units available from us landlords. And I say us landlords because I am one. I have an old house in the historic district, and there's a back building there, and so I rent it out. Okay, so you know when these news flashes come along about rent control, and people saying, oh, let's go, you know, it's so tempting, right? Politician proposes rent controls. And you're thinking, yeah, I'm pretty stressed budgetarily. You mean if all I do is go boop here in San Antonio where I'm speaking, that's all you have to do to vote for something, right? There's this video screen, and then sometimes it goes boop back at you. If all I do is go boop, my rent will go down? Whoa, that's easy. Yeah, let's do that. So hold the phone. That might not be such a good idea because, yeah, that might work. In your case, maybe you're in an apartment already and the landlord will keep it on the market and be forced by law to charge less than they had been. What if that landlord's like John Merrifield? And he's just making ends barely meet on that apartment. Yeah, he might be big money bags and he could afford to charge lower rent and absorb the loss. Why? I spent a lot of money maintaining that apartment. It's an old building. You know, the roof caved in one time and the back wall had to be torn down. And, you know, anyway, it's expensive to maintain that apartment. If I had to charge any less rent than the market seems to be in my area, I'm not sure I'd keep that thing on the market. I don't have anything against the tenants out there. I'm just looking at marginal benefits and costs. To me, thinking I don't want to lose money by having this apartment available at the rent that would be mandated under rent control. And I might want to have my dogs play in there or have my boys be able to have that as a play area. Then I don't have to worry about if the roof leaks a little bit or something because they don't have to be in there if it's raining. All right, so anyway, back to our graph. Okay, so if we leave the market alone, supply and demand will do their thing and the shortages will be eliminated by the price mechanism and surpluses will be eliminated. And by the way, that's constantly happening. I mean, there's constantly movement of supply and demand, and then whatever the price was, suddenly there's a shortage or a surplus, and the price moves up or down to eliminate that. It does that without anybody looking. It's a free mechanism provided by freedom in action. Okay, people comparing marginal costs to them, the marginal benefits to them, and changing the behavior accordingly. All right, so we would have this rent, call it a price, 0, okay, and quantity, 0, initial quantity and price, pre any rent control. Okay, so there's complaints by some that, you know, hey, I just can't make ends meet. You know, I want to live in San Francisco. See, there's a key. I want to live in San Francisco. But I can't afford to live in San Francisco. I know I can't afford it even on a pretty good salary as a professor. Housing there is phenomenally expensive. I don't know how people live in a place like San Francisco. I guess they, you know, at least they bought the house years ago or something. $500,000, $1 million on a dumpy little place. Mortgage payment on that, if you borrowed money, even at current mortgage rates, it'd be $40,000 or $50,000 a year. How do you find it? Anyway. People live in San Francisco, and then the rents go up, and I want to stay in San Francisco. See, normally they'd have to move, right? Can't afford to live there, the rents are too high. Boop! I can tell my city councilman to pass a rent control law. And all I've got to do is keep voting for him or her to keep them in office, assuming we get the law passed. Okay, my rents will be lower. All right, so here's the temptation through the ballot box saying, you know, I don't have to go live somewhere else. I like it right here where I am. Yeah, the prices are a little bit too high. It's a little hard to pay for food after rent, among other expenses. Okay, so let's legislate P, is that an X? legislate P max, rent control. Okay, and so those rascals out there like Merrifield, quantity supplied will be reduced because some apartments will be immediately taken off the market because the rent allowed by law is no longer enough to induce that owner to maintain the dwelling in that unit. It's not going to disappear off the face of the earth. I mean, the unit is probably going to say, yeah, in some places it's falling apart and just flatten it. But in most cases, it's just going to be converted to some other use, either private or maybe turn into a condominium or an office space. I remember spending a week in Washington, D.C. one time working with a colleague on a book, and I spent the night in his office overnight. Where was his office? It was an old apartment building. Okay, wonder why it got converted to an item. I remember Washington, D.C. having rent controls, but maybe that's what it was. The market shifted somehow that where the owner of the building said, you know, these things look like apartments. They have kitchens and bathrooms and all that, living rooms. But it makes more sense to rent them now as offices than apartments. All right, so anyway, more people want an apartment at the lower price than they did otherwise. Think of those nasty roommates that you have, right, if you have one. I remember my roommates in college. They were a real pain in the rear end at times. If it had been cheap enough, I'd have said, I'm out of here. Right? But I went to school in Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, another part of California where it isn't cheap to live. It was hard to build there, and so prices kept going up because the demand increases and the supply wouldn't keep up. So anyway, more people at the lower end want apartments because some of them are not in very ideal living circumstances from their perspective. At the lower price, that says, I'm out of here. You know, at the original price, I had to tolerate a roommate to share the rent. This lower, I'll go with my own. So the combination of these two things yields a shortage. Okay? Now, what if we were to do something like housing vouchers? Okay? We could either increase the demand or the supply, but since I've got a point here already, let's make the subsidy go to the sellers. Okay? So, two ways to do the same thing. The vertical amount times Q sub D was the amount of money that it cost the government to provide the housing voucher. Notice in this case, there's no longer a shortage, okay? But again, it does cost money to society. There's no deadweight loss. Well, I guess you could call this a deadweight loss given that the additional supply costs more than somebody values it, okay? But this is based on an equity premise that the housing costs too much, and that this is okay, but P0 is not. Okay, so the inefficiency is warranted. See, the inefficiency here, this deadweight loss from the housing voucher, the discount for housing or the payment to the landlord for providing housing per month to certain people, is like a price tag for the equity gain of housing falling to this price to tenants. Okay, whereas this deadweight loss is the result of having the rent control, right? That some additional tenants out there were willing to spend more than the opportunity cost of keeping the dwellings in that use. Okay, but if this is the maximum price, that's all that's going to be supplied, right? And so these additional efficient transactions cannot occur. Notice that whenever there's a difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied, the lesser of the two is the amount that actually is in use. It can be purchased. Yeah, we'd love to have more, but this is all that's going to be available to buy. And another thing that almost anybody knows that it's ever watched a movie that's set in New York, which there's a lot of those, is that when you have a shortage of something, that the quality of it goes down. Okay, try to get a rental unit fixed that's rent controlled. Yeah, the landlord's in no hurry at all. They've got a long waiting list of tenants that want your apartment. Okay, so if you're unhappy with something not working in the apartment, by all means, sayonara, bye. Somebody will take your apartment in the condition that it's in tomorrow. Okay, so not worth complaining. So, see, that's one way of raising the rent, in effect. I mean, you're still charging this much, but you just put less maintenance into it. It's not the same apartment it used to be. It's this price tag on a lesser apartment. Right? As a result of the rent controls, it's not going to be maintained as much or as well, right? Because they don't have to keep it full. All right, so the political and marginal analysis says, yeah, mandate, sure. Make it look like the government's doing something for us to make the rent come down. Most people are not economically astute enough to blame the government for the fact that they can't find an apartment at this lower mandated price. The alternative that yields the same effect in terms of price and affordability would be some sort of a housing voucher or discount or subsidy, which either increases the supply or increases the demand, either way, so that the net out-of-pocket cost of the tenant could be the same as the P-max that might have been set under rent control. One of them has a deadweight loss that's a result of promoting equity, saying, willingness to pay isn't that important for some people because they just don't have as much to pay, whereas the other one creates a deadweight loss by banning some transactions that might otherwise be deemed profitable by the agents involved or potentially involved.